Think you know everything about Jackie Gleason's classic sitcom? Think again. From secret filming technology that revolutionized television to a star who disguised herself to get the role, The Honeymooners hides jaw-dropping secrets behind every bang zoom. Discover the bizarre blacklisting scandal, the revolutionary camera system that saved the show for posterity, and why Hollywood's biggest star begged for a sewer worker cameo. Fact 1. The Lost Episodes Mystery. For decades, fans of The Honeymooners believed they had seen everything the show had to offer, just 39 classic episodes from the 1955 to 1956 season that aired on CBS. What they didn't know was that Jackie Gleason had been sitting on a television treasure trove that would eventually change everything fans thought they knew about the beloved sitcom. Hidden away in a climate-controlled vault in Miami, Gleason had secretly preserved over 75 additional Honeymooners episodes and sketches that had been performed live on his variety shows throughout the 1950s. These weren't just random clips or outtakes, they were complete, fully formed Honeymooners stories that had aired once on live television and then disappeared into television history. The episodes ranged from short 7-minute sketches to full 48-minute productions, representing years of Ralph Kramden's schemes and domestic battles that the public had completely forgotten about. Gleason had learned a painful lesson early in his career when the Dumont television network allowed recordings of his shows to be destroyed, so he made sure to personally arrange for kinescope recordings of all his CBS programs. These kinescope films were shot directly from television monitors during the live broadcasts, capturing performances that would have otherwise been lost forever. While the picture quality wasn't as sharp as the filmed classic 39 episodes, the content was pure gold for Honeymooners fans. The great reveal came in 1985, when Gleason finally decided the time was right to open his vault. Amid enormous publicity and excitement from fans who had been watching the same 39 episodes in endless reruns for 30 years, these lost episodes were released to television stations and home video. The discovery effectively doubled the amount of available Honeymooners content overnight, giving fans dozens of previously unseen Ralph and Alice arguments, Ed Norton's sewer worker wisdom, and Trixie's dry observations that had been hidden away in Florida for 3 decades. Fact 2. Alice's brilliant disguise audition. When Audrey Meadows first walked into Jackie Gleason's office to audition for the role of Alice Kramden, she was immediately turned away with a rejection that would have ended most acting careers before they started. Gleason took one look at the polished, glamorous actress and declared she was too young and too pretty to play the working-class wife of a Brooklyn bus driver, dismissing her without even giving her a chance to read for the part. Most actresses would have accepted defeat and moved on to other opportunities, but Meadows had a different plan that showed just how badly she wanted the role and how well she understood the character she was trying to portray. Instead of arguing with Gleason or trying to convince him through traditional means, she decided to prove her point through visual evidence that would be impossible to ignore. Meadows arranged for a photographer to come to her apartment at 4 o'clock in the morning, timing the shoot for when she would look her absolute worst. She deliberately avoided any makeup, let her hair become completely disheveled, and put on the most unflattering house dress she could find. The photographer captured her in this completely unglamorous state, taking pictures that showed her looking tired, worn down, and exactly like a woman who had been dealing with Ralph Kramden's schemes and outbursts for years. Without revealing her identity, Meadows had these photographs delivered directly to Gleason's office with a note suggesting this woman would be perfect for the role of Alice. When Gleason saw the photos, he immediately became excited and declared, "That's Alice! That's exactly what I'm looking for!" He demanded to know who this actress was and insisted on meeting her right away. When he discovered that the woman in the photographs was the same glamorous actress he had rejected just days earlier, he was so impressed by her creativity and understanding of the character that he hired her on the spot. Fact 3. The communist blacklist replacement. Before Audrey Meadows became the Alice Kramden that television audiences remember and love, the role was originally played by a seasoned character actress named Pert Kelton, who brought a much different energy to Ralph's wife during the early Honeymooners sketches on the Dumont Network's Cavalcade of Stars. Kelton portrayed Alice as more of a battle-hardened woman who could match Ralph's bombast with equal force, creating a dynamic that felt more like watching two gladiators argue than the more nuanced relationship that would later develop. When Jackie Gleason moved from Dumont to CBS in 1952, network executives made it clear that Pert Kelton would not be making the transition with him, and the reason had nothing to do with her acting ability or chemistry with the cast. During the height of the McCarthy-era's communist paranoia that was sweeping through Hollywood and the entertainment industry, Kelton had been placed on the infamous blacklist that destroyed countless careers based on the flimsiest of evidence and guilt by association. The investigation that led to Kelton's blacklisting revealed the absurd lengths to which the anti-communist hysteria had reached in 1950s America. According to playwright Arthur Miller, who was a family friend and wrote about the situation years later in his autobiography, extensive inquiries finally uncovered the evidence against Kelton. Her husband Ralph had participated in a May Day parade years earlier, not because of any political beliefs or communist sympathies, but simply because he had joined a group of fellow actors who were protesting some long-forgotten cause that had nothing to do with politics. Miller emphasized just how ridiculous the entire situation was, noting that Ralph Kelton had absolutely no leftist connections whatever but had simply thrown himself in with a gang of actors protesting whatever it was that year. Even more absurd was the fact that Pert Kelton herself had never even voted in her life, making her about as far from a political activist as anyone could possibly be. Fact 4. Revolutionary secret filming technology. When Jackie Gleason decided to transform the Honeymooners from live sketches into a filmed television series for the 1955 season, he faced a major technical challenge that would require pioneering technology that had never been used for a regular television production. Gleason wanted to maintain the energy and spontaneity of performing in front of a live audience, while also creating high-quality film that could be rebroadcast and eventually syndicated. But the television industry in 1955 didn't have an easy solution for this seemingly impossible combination. The answer came from an experimental system called Electronicum that had been developed by the Dumont Television Network's laboratories in the early 1950s, years before videotape recording would become available to television producers. This revolutionary technology used a complex beam splitter system that sent light from a single lens in two different directions. Simultaneously, half the light went to a traditional television camera that broadcast the live performance to viewers at home, while the other half went to a 35mm film camera that captured the same images on high-quality movie film. The Electronicam system required massive camera dollies that had to support both the electronic television camera and the film camera at the same time, making the equipment extremely bulky, heavy, and difficult to maneuver around the studio floor. The technical complexity meant that only simple productions with minimal camera movements and few set changes could realistically use the system, which made The Honeymooners, with its single apartment, set an ideal candidate for this experimental technology. What made Gleason's decision to use Electronicam so prescient was that it gave The Honeymooners something that most other live television shows of the era completely lacked: high-quality film copies that looked far superior to the kinescope recordings that other shows relied on. This superior picture and sound quality is the reason why The Honeymooners episodes still look remarkably good today, while most other 1950s television shows that survived only as kinescopes appear grainy and difficult to watch. Fact 5. Cary Grant's sewer worker dreams. During the summer hiatus of The Honeymooners, Audrey Meadows was walking across the Paramount Studios lot one afternoon when she was approached by none other than Cary Grant, one of Hollywood's most elegant and sophisticated leading men, who was the very definition of suave charm and debonair style. Meadows was initially flattered that such a major movie star would make a point of seeking her out, assuming he wanted to discuss her work or perhaps offer her a role in one of his upcoming films. What Grant actually wanted came as a complete shock to Meadows and revealed just how much of an impact The Honeymooners was having on even the biggest names in Hollywood. Grant explained that he was a devoted fan of the show and had a very specific request that he hoped Meadows could help him with. He desperately wanted Jackie Gleason to allow him to make a guest appearance on The Honeymooners, not as a glamorous leading man or sophisticated character, but as Ed Norton's assistant working down in the New York City sewers. Grant's enthusiasm for this decidedly unglamorous role was so genuine that he went into detail about exactly what he envisioned for his character, telling Meadows with complete seriousness, "I could be Ed Norton's assistant in the sewer." When Meadows expressed concern about the working conditions that such a role would involve, pointing out that those sewer workers are exposed to all those rats and all that filth, Grant quickly reassured her that the unpleasant aspects of the job didn't bother him in the least. The image of the impeccably dressed, sophisticated Cary Grant eagerly volunteering to crawl around in mock sewers and deal with fake rats and grime was so incongruous that Meadows could barely picture it happening, but Grant's sincere desire to be part of the Honeymooners' world showed just how much the show had captured the imagination of Hollywood's elite. Unfortunately for Grant and fans who would have loved to see this unlikely casting, the guest appearance never materialized. Fact 6. The anti-rehearsal philosophy. Jackie Gleason had a completely unconventional approach to preparing for the Honeymooners that would have terrified most television producers and actors, but which he believed was essential to maintaining the authentic energy that made the show so compelling to audiences. While most television productions of the 1950s involved extensive rehearsals and careful preparation to avoid mistakes during live broadcasts, Gleason deliberately chose to do the exact opposite, showing up for episodes with minimal preparation and refusing to participate in the thorough rehearsal process that his co-stars desperately wanted. Gleason's reasoning for this unusual approach was based on his firm belief that too much rehearsal would fundamentally change the nature of the performances and destroy what made the Honeymooners special. He was convinced that rehearsals would rob the show of its spontaneity and turn the natural, realistic interactions between Ralph and Alice into overly polished, artificial exchanges that would lose the raw emotional authenticity that viewers connected with so strongly. While Gleason preferred to spend his afternoons relaxing with friends at Toots Shore's famous Manhattan restaurant and bar rather than rehearsing, his co-stars Audrey Meadows, Art Carney, and Joyce Randolph took a completely different approach to preparation. Understanding that they would need to be ready to compensate for Gleason's unpredictable performance style, the three actors would often rehearse together separately, with someone else reading Ralph's lines so they could be prepared for whatever might happen during the actual filming. This clash of preparation styles led to exactly the kind of on-air mistakes and forgotten lines that Gleason's philosophy inevitably created. But rather than seeing these as problems to be avoided, Gleason viewed them as opportunities for genuine moments that couldn't be scripted or planned. When he occasionally forgot dialogue during filming, he would signal his distress by patting his stomach, which became a secret cue for his co-stars to jump in with improvised dialogue that would help him get back on track with the scene. Fact 7. Art Carney's father inspired Norton. One of the most memorable and hilarious aspects of Ed Norton's character was his elaborate ritual of preparation before performing even the simplest tasks, whether he was signing a letter, playing the piano, or getting ready to fix a pipe in the sewer. Viewers would watch in amusement as Norton would carefully adjust the desk lamp to get the lighting just right, align papers with mathematical precision, move other items around on the desk until they were positioned exactly where he wanted them, flex his arms and crack his knuckles, and double-check his pen before finally beginning whatever mundane activity he was about to undertake. What most fans never realized was that Art Carney didn't have to use his imagination to create these wonderfully obsessive preparation routines because he was simply copying behavior he had observed countless times throughout his childhood. Carney's own father had exactly the same quirky habits and couldn't perform the simplest task without going through an incredibly detailed series of preparatory steps that would drive the rest of the family to distraction with their unnecessary complexity and time consumption. Carney remembered watching his father go through these elaborate rituals for activities as basic as signing his son's report card, a task that should have taken no more than a few seconds but would instead become a lengthy production involving multiple adjustments and preparations. His father would carefully position the report card on the desk, adjust the lighting in the room, move other papers and objects to create the perfect workspace, test his pen multiple times, flex his writing hand, and perform several other completely unnecessary steps before finally putting his signature on the document. By drawing directly from these childhood memories of his father's compulsive preparation habits, Carney was able to bring an authentic and naturally funny quality to Norton's character that felt completely genuine rather than forced or exaggerated. The elaborate rituals became one of Norton's most endearing characteristics and provided endless opportunities for comedy, as Ralph would grow increasingly frustrated watching his friend turn every simple task into an elaborate ceremony. Fact 8. The apartment poverty was personal. When Jackie Gleason designed the sparsely furnished crammed-in apartment set for the Honeymooners, he wasn't creating a fictional representation of working-class life in Brooklyn. He was recreating the actual living conditions he had experienced during his own impoverished childhood in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood. Gleason deliberately modeled every detail of Ralph and Alice's dreary home after the Chauncey Street tenement, where he had grown up after his father abandoned the family, leaving his mother to struggle as a subway attendant trying to make ends meet on an incredibly small income. The crammed-in apartment that viewers saw each week featured the same kind of minimal furnishings that Gleason remembered from his youth. a simple table and chairs, a chest of drawers, a curtainless window that looked out onto fire escapes and other tenement buildings, a noisy sink, and an outdated icebox that Alice was constantly complaining about. Gleason wanted the set to feel authentically depressing and worn down, reflecting the reality of people who were working hard but still barely getting by financially, rather than the comfortable middle-class suburban homes that were becoming standard on other television shows of the 1950s. The apartment set was so convincingly bleak and depressing that it began to genuinely concern viewers across America who felt sorry for Alice Cramden and wanted to help improve her living situation. Audrey Meadows started receiving bags of mail every week from sympathetic fans who had taken it upon themselves to try to brighten up the Cramden home by sending decorative items, handmade curtains for the bare window, colorful aprons for Alice to wear, and various knickknacks that they thought would make the apartment feel more cheerful and livable. This outpouring of concern from viewers showed just how effectively Gleason had captured the authentic feeling of economic hardship that he remembered from his own childhood, creating a set design that felt so real and depressing that people watching at home felt compelled to try to help a fictional character improve her living conditions. Fact 9. Only Alice got residuals. While Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, and Joyce Randolph all earned their standard salaries for appearing in The Honeymooners and then moved on to other projects without any additional compensation, Audrey Meadows had the incredible foresight to negotiate a contract clause that would continue paying her for decades after the show ended. This remarkable piece of business negotiation happened because Meadows had two brothers who worked as attorneys and understood the entertainment industry well enough to see potential value that no one else was considering at the time. When it came time for Meadows to sign her contract for The Honeymooners in 1952, her attorney brothers accompanied her to the bargaining table and insisted that a very specific clause be inserted into her agreement that would give her residual payments if any episodes were ever rebroadcast in the future. This was an almost unheard-of request in the early days of television, when the concept of reruns was still fairly new, and most people in the industry couldn't imagine that old television shows would have any lasting commercial value. The network executives and producers agreed to include this residual clause in Meadows' contract without much resistance or negotiation, because they simply could not envision a scenario where The Honeymooners episodes would still be valuable enough to rebroadcast years or decades later. The idea that these 39 episodes would become the perfect programming to fill late-night time slots on local stations across the country and eventually become a syndication goldmine was completely beyond their imagination. In the 1950s, Meadows' shrewd manager had predicted that reruns would become a standard part of television programming, and this prediction proved to be incredibly accurate and profitable. For more than 40 years after The Honeymooners ended, Meadows continued to receive regular royalty checks every time the episodes aired anywhere in the world, while her co-stars received absolutely nothing from the show's enormous success in syndication, making her contract one of the most prescient deals in television history. Fact 10. The failed props were left in. One of the most famous episodes of The Honeymooners, titled Better Living Through Television, featured Ralph and Ed attempting to demonstrate a kitchen gadget called the Handy Housewife Helper during what was supposed to be a smooth and professional television commercial that would make them rich and famous. The episode was particularly memorable not just for its hilarious premise, but because everything that could go wrong during the filming actually did go wrong, and Jackie Gleason's philosophy of never doing retakes meant that all of these real disasters ended up in the final episode that viewers saw. During the scene where Ralph was demonstrating how the Handy Housewife Helper was supposed to work, the prop literally fell apart in his hands as he was trying to show off its various features to the imaginary television audience. Instead of stopping the filming to fix the prop or start the scene over, Gleason immediately ad-libbed a line that tried to make sense of the malfunction, telling viewers with perfect comedic timing, "Maybe we ought to say something about spearfishing," as if the broken pieces of the kitchen gadget could somehow be repurposed as fishing equipment. The prop disaster was just the beginning of the problems that plagued this particular filming session, because later in the same episode, Gleason accidentally backed into part of the set and knocked down a section of the wall that was supposed to represent the television studio where Ralph and Ed were filming their commercial. Most television producers would have immediately called for the cameras to stop rolling so the set could be repaired and the scene could be started fresh, but Gleason's commitment to maintaining the spontaneous energy of live performance meant that this accidental destruction of the set also remained in the final episode. These genuine mistakes and Gleason's quick-thinking, improvised responses to them created some of the most authentically funny moments in The Honeymooners, proving that his anti-rehearsal philosophy could sometimes produce comedy gold that no amount of careful planning could have achieved. Fact 11. The Flintstones lawsuit that never was. When The Flintstones premiered on ABC in 1960, Jackie Gleason immediately recognized that the animated series was essentially a Stone Age version of The Honeymooners, with dinosaurs and prehistoric settings replacing the Brooklyn apartment and modern conveniences. The similarities between the two shows were so obvious that they couldn't possibly be coincidental. Fred Flintstone was clearly based on Ralph Cramden as a loud, overweight, scheme-obsessed husband, while Wilma mirrored Alice as the patient but sharp-tongued wife who often had to deal with her husband's ridiculous ideas. Even more telling was that Barney Rubble was an almost exact copy of Ed Norton as the loyal but dim-witted best friend, and Betty Rubble served the same role as Trixie Norton as the supportive neighbor wife. Gleason was understandably upset about what he saw as a blatant theft of his creative work, and immediately began exploring the possibility of filing a lawsuit against Hanna-Barbera Productions for copyright infringement. He had his lawyers research the legal basis for such a lawsuit and was seriously considering taking the animation studio to court to protect his intellectual property and receive compensation for what he believed was the unauthorized use of his characters and storylines. However, just as Gleason was preparing to move forward with legal action that could have potentially shut down the Flintstones or forced major changes to the show, his publicist intervened with a question that completely changed Gleason's perspective on the situation. The publicist asked him a simple but powerful question that made Gleason reconsider the potential consequences of his lawsuit. Do you want to go down in history as the man who killed Fred Flintstone? This single question made Gleason realize that pursuing the lawsuit could seriously damage his public image and turn him from a beloved comedian into the villain who destroyed a popular children's cartoon that families across America were enjoying together. Rather than risk being remembered as the person who took away Fred Flintstone from millions of children, Gleason decided to drop his legal plans and let the Flintstones continue without interference. Fact 12. Secret stomach. Pat distress signal. Jackie Gleason's refusal to rehearse thoroughly and his preference for spontaneous performances occasionally put him in situations where he would forget his lines or lose track of where he was in a scene, but he and his co-stars developed a clever system of secret signals that allowed them to handle these moments without breaking character or stopping the filming. When Gleason found himself struggling to remember his dialogue or unsure of what he was supposed to say next during a scene, he would discreetly pat his stomach as a silent distress signal to let his fellow actors know that he needed help getting back on track. This stomach-patting gesture was subtle enough that audiences watching the show would never notice it or understand its significance, but it was clearly visible to the other actors on stage who had learned to watch for this particular signal during their performances. The most common recipient of this distress signal was Art Carney, who had become expert at recognizing when Gleason was in trouble and needed assistance to continue with the scene without creating an obvious break in the action. When Carney spotted Gleason patting his stomach, he would immediately jump into action by launching into improvised dialogue that would give Gleason the time and space he needed to remember his lines and figure out how to get back into the flow of the scripted material. Carney would often create elaborate Ed Norton monologues or detailed explanations of sewer work procedures that could go on for as long as necessary, while Gleason recovered his composure and remembered what he was supposed to be doing in the scene. Audrey Meadows also learned to recognize this secret signal and would sometimes help Gleason by using body language cues like sidelong glances or positioning herself in ways that would guide him back to his proper position on the stage. This collaborative system of silent communication allowed the cast to maintain the natural flow of their performances, even when things went wrong behind the scenes. Fact 13. The George Burns name drop. During one episode of The Honeymooners, Ed Norton was working on a crossword puzzle when he casually mentioned a coworker from the sewer department named Nat Birnbaum, explaining to Ralph that Nat was a three-letter word for bug as he tried to solve one of the puzzle clues. Most viewers watching the episode would have assumed this was just another one of Norton's random references to his fellow sewer workers, but the writers had actually included a very clever hidden tribute to one of comedy's biggest stars that only people in the entertainment industry would have recognized. The name Nat Birnbaum wasn't a fictional sewer worker created for the show, it was actually the real birth name of George Burns, one of the most famous comedians and entertainers of the 1950s who was known to television audiences as half of the popular comedy duo Burns and Allen. George Burns had been born Nathan Birnbaum in 1896, but like many performers of his generation, he had changed his name early in his career to something that sounded more theatrical and easier for audiences to remember. By the time The Honeymooners was on the air, George Burns was already a well-established star of radio, television, and vaudeville, making this reference a perfect inside joke that would be appreciated by other people working in show business while flying completely over the heads of regular viewers. The writers clearly enjoyed including these kinds of subtle references that added an extra layer of humor for people who were familiar with the entertainment world and the real names and backgrounds of famous performers. This kind of hidden reference was typical of the sophisticated writing that made The Honeymooners appealing to both general audiences who enjoyed the surface comedy and industry insiders who could appreciate the more subtle jokes and references that were woven throughout the episodes. The fact that Norton would know a sewer worker named Nat Birnbaum was completely believable within the context of the show, while also serving as a clever nod to George Burns. Fact 14. The mother-daughter age scandal. When Jackie Gleason decided to reunite the original Honeymooners cast for a series of holiday specials in the late 1970s, one of the featured episodes was a 1978 Christmas special that brought back many of the familiar characters and relationships that fans remembered from the original series. Among the guest stars was seasoned actress Eileen Heckart, who was cast in the role of Alice's mother, a character who had appeared occasionally in the original series and was known for her difficult relationship with Ralph and her protective attitude toward her daughter. What made this casting choice particularly unusual was the fact that Heckart was actually only 3 years older than Audrey Meadows, who was playing her supposed daughter Alice in the special. This meant that a woman who had been born in 1919 was playing the mother of a woman who had been born in 1922, creating an almost impossible family dynamic that would have required Alice's mother to have given birth when she was barely 3 years old. The age discrepancy became even more absurd when considering the content of Heckart's dialogue in the Christmas special, because her character spent much of her screen time making comments about her desire to become a grandmother and expressing hope that Ralph and Alice would finally have children who could carry on the family name. These references to Alice's potential motherhood were particularly strange, given that Audrey Meadows was 55 years old at the time the special was filmed, making the idea of her character having children both medically unlikely and dramatically unrealistic. The casting decision apparently prioritized Heckart's acting ability and her chemistry with the rest of the cast over the logical age requirements for playing Alice's mother, creating a situation where viewers had to completely suspend their disbelief about the family relationships being portrayed on screen. The fact that no one involved in the production seemed to notice or care about this obvious age problem suggests that the focus was entirely on recreating the familiar dynamics of the original show. Fact 15. 2 episodes per week madness. While most television productions in the 1950s followed a standard schedule of filming 1 episode per week to allow adequate time for writing, rehearsal, and preparation, Jackie Gleason decided to take a completely different approach with The Honeymooners that pushed both the cast and crew to their absolute limits. Gleason's production company committed to filming 2 complete episodes every single week at the Dumont Television Network's Adelphi Theater in Manhattan, creating an incredibly demanding schedule that required twice the normal amount of creative output and performance energy from everyone involved in the show. Each filming session took place in front of a live audience of 1,000 people who packed into the theater to watch the performances, adding an extra layer of pressure and excitement that made every episode feel like a live theatrical event rather than a typical television production. The audience's reactions and energy became an integral part of the creative process, but managing this many people twice a week while maintaining high production standards created logistical challenges that most other shows never had to face. This exhausting pace meant that the show's writers had to produce twice as many scripts as their counterparts on other television series, constantly coming up with new situations for Ralph's get-rich-quick schemes and domestic arguments between the Cramdens and Nortons. The actors also had to memorize twice as much dialogue and be ready to perform at their peak energy levels, much more frequently than was typical for television stars of the era. The relentless schedule eventually began to take its toll on the quality and creativity of the show, as Jackie Gleason himself noticed that the writers were starting to struggle with generating fresh ideas and maintaining the high standards that had made the Honeymooners so successful. This grueling production pace was one of the factors that contributed to Gleason's decision to end the series after just 39 episodes, as he realized that the demanding schedule was making it increasingly difficult to maintain the excellence that fans expected from the show.